Back to T-Trak modules today, and I've brought the Floridian module outside to see how it looks in natural light. I've also brought out a module kit that I assembled and will be using in a future video. This module is from Klondike's. T-Trak modules are basically wooden boxes with adjustable feet so they can be raised or lowered to properly mate up with other modules. Each maker does their modules a little differently, but I quite like how the little boards that hold the set screws for the feet slot into the side boards of the module. This allows the module to be built from the sides up and right side up as opposed to the upside down method I've had to use assembling other kits. The module also has the track location and part numbers for the KATO track pieces marked clearly, which is a very handy feature. Klondike kits come with all the hardware you need. To get a module assembled like this, all you'll need is some wood glue, hex keys, and blue tape. I think they're priced nicely as well. These kits can be purchased from Klondike.com, that's KLAWNDYKE.com, and you can use my code JLRR5 for a 5% discount. Thank you very much to Klondike. Now, as the lady on the cooking show said, here's one I prepared earlier. This is a module from a different maker that I bought along with what became the Floridian module. This time I want to do a rural farm field scene. I had a little trouble with the caulking I used to secure the track, but we'll deal with that shortly. One of my favorite scenic elements are grade crossings, so I'm going to add one. I can use it to try to cover up some of the caulking mess to boot. I have some basswood left over from a spring 2020 project that never took flight, so I'm going to use that to make a rough facsimile of crossing boards. I measure each stick to length and cut it with an X-Acto knife. Normally one wouldn't dream of using the project as a cutting board, but this wood is going to get covered anyways. Does this make me a scratch builder? Maybe just a tiny bit? I will need a total of 8 boards, one on the outside of each rail, and 2 on the inside of the rails on both tracks. I might be able to fill the space between the rails more completely, but I want to leave as much clearance in the flangeways as possible to ensure the module won't cause problems for any trains passing over it. On a modular layout, you literally never know what will go across your module. Alright, another cut to make, and... where'd it go? After digging that piece out from my pile of paint cans, I paired up the boards to glue them together. These will serve as the middles of the crossing. A little superglue will do the trick. I then set the boards up on pieces of paper to let the superglue do its super thing. Now to form the terrain. I intend for this to be a dirt country road and for it to run slightly off to the left after the crossing. To start with, though, I need to build up the ground on either side of the tracks. I'm turning back to my go-to, Sculptamold. My methodology is simple. I whip up a small batch of Sculptamold using a shot glass as the measuring device, 2 parts compound to 1 part water. I then pull globs from the bowl to place on the module. Next, I shape the Sculptamold to the contours I want using whatever tools are at hand, often plastic cutlery. In this case, I also hold the outer crossing board in place as I work. I want the Sculptamold to be right up against the crossing boards. This will form the base of the road. The Sculptamold has been set around the crossing. Now to follow the same technique and build up down the lane and along the other side of the field. Next, I secure the middle boards to the crossing. Superglue works just fine. I knew just by eyeballing it that the crossing boards were too tall and would likely foul coupler trip pins and some truck bodies passing over it. So, once the Sculptamold around the crossing was dry, or mostly dry, I took a piece of sandpaper and began to sand down the crossing boards. I went until the tops of the board were even with the rails, then chamfered the ends of the boards so that if something is hanging lower, the crossing will just lift it up instead of snagging it. I also did some testing off camera with a few pieces of rolling stock to make sure the crossing would work. After letting the Sculptamold dry, I masked off the crossing boards and got ready to paint the freshly set plaster. Clay. What is Sculptamold anyways? Regardless, I painted the Sculptamold with the same brown acrylic paint from Hobby Lobby that I painted the base of the module with. At this point, I leave the module to dry overnight. To start my next work session, I got the white glue out and began to ballast the tracks. The method here is simply to brush the glue onto the sides of the track where the ballast should go, pile the ballast up next to the track, and sweep it into place. I will use the scenic cement to secure any loose ballast later on. Now for the first turf application. I'm using Woodland Scenic's Earth Turf here. Simple technique, paint white glue down where the stuff should stick and sprinkle it on. I think I'm going to give the module a little shake to spread things around, and that worked well. I've covered the crossing boards with masking tape to keep them clean and to keep the turf out of the crossing flangeways while I work around them. The next step of construction will be to lay down the dirt for the road. I covered the spot on the end of the module for the road with earth turf, but I think I'm going a slightly different route for the rest of it. The dirt I'm using for the road is, well, dirt. I went out back on a dry day and shoveled some soil into a plastic container that I'm drawing from. I will also use this stuff for the field. It might not be perfectly to scale, but you can't deny there's little more realistic than the real thing. I ground the dirt clods up in my fingers and let the pieces sprinkle down onto the module. I then used a plastic spoon to pack it down a bit. While I was back here, I elected to do both the turf and the road at the same time. I covered the whole raised area with white glue to prepare it. The back part of the road was laid out the same way the other sections were, hand grinding the dirt to make it nice and fine, then spreading it onto the module. After a little tamping down of the dirt by hand and by spoon, I got out the Woodland Scenics Earth turf shaker and covered the remaining glue on this part of the module. Once the one side of the field was covered, I repeated the process on the other side of the field. Once the turf had been laid on both sides of the field, it was time to place down the dirt for the field itself. I used basically the same method I had used for the road, but I didn't really bother with packing the dirt down. The biggest difference in doing the field was that there was much more of it. Because I wanted to emulate a plowed field, I needed to draw rows in the dirt somehow. I tried doing it by hand, but that was a mistake. I took a small, thin ruler and pushed it down into the dirt to make rows. I then moved over and pushed down again, and again, before eventually having some decent marks in the dirt. This technique was an experiment for me, as I wasn't sure how well these lines would hold up to the final glue down. Now to lay down some more green. Here I have another Woodland Scenics Fine Turf Shaker, and I'm going to lay down some brighter green to give the impression of grasses surrounding the field. Trees are next. I select a tree I would like to place, feel it around the module until it looks right, drill a hole in the sculpt-a-mold with a pin vise, put some glue on the bottom of the tree, and plant it. I repeat the process until the module looks appropriately sylvan. Now it's time for bushes and shrubbery. I pull pieces of clump foliage from their bag, put a dab of white glue on their bottom, and place them. It's the same process over and over again until I don't see too many more places where a bush would look good. Yes, I do see the trees moving in this sped-up clip, but rest assured, in real time they were a bit more stealthy. I did notice later, and we'll deal with them then. So one must ask, where should the bushes go? Other than hopefully on the ground. I think this is where some of Bob Ross's guiding principles would come into play. In this case, this single square-foot representation of a location is the sole domain of the one creating it, much as your module will be your sole domain. This is my world, and I shall place the bushes where they look, dare I say it, happy? In more practical terms, I look over the module and figure there should be something every, insert arbitrary distance here. I know it when I see it, and I keep placing bushes and grass and whatnot until I don't see any places that could use more. Having had plenty of time to look over the field, there were a couple spots that looked to me like they needed a little more dirt coverage, so I sprinkled some more on. Now for the addition of coarse turf. This will give the impression of smaller plants or maybe weeds. Again, I just eyeball it and place the coarse turf wherever it looks like it belongs. Somewhere in here is where I realized the trees were getting crooked, so I added some white glue to their base and pointed them in the right direction with some small clothespins. By now I had reached the point of looking at the module trying to figure out what else needed adding, and was unable to come up with anything. I let the fresh glue dry, then prepared for the final glue down. I did a couple last-minute tweaks involving covering a few little things with more coarse turf. Then it was time for the scenic cement. Scenic cement itself is a product of Woodland Scenics, but an easy DIY compound, which I'm using, is just giving the scenery a soaking of isopropyl alcohol, followed by a soaking of a 50-50 mix of white glue and water. If you soak all the foliage and everything else on the ground, it will glue it down nice and solid as well as fortify the foliage. It's a long process for sure, but the results speak for themselves. To apply the scenic cement, I use pipettes from Hobby Lobby. I spread the alcohol first. The operating theory here is that the alcohol will break the surface tension of the water and glue, allowing it to flow more freely into the scenic materials. I then use another pipette to apply the homemade cement. I make sure to cover the entirety of the ground scenery, except for the rails and crossing boards. I soak the bushes from the top down, as I find this makes them much more solid when things dry. The dirt was not absorbing the cement like the other materials, but I should have expected that. I did poke around with different things to make sure it did absorb though, such as adding more alcohol. Yes, like many modelers, I couldn't keep my hands off it once things were put down. Not the best practice, but I think I got lucky. Once everything was soaked, I removed the tape from the crossing boards as I expect no more contaminants to be flying around, and I don't want the scenic cement to glue the tape down along with the scenery. With that, there is little more to do than let the scenic cement do its thing overnight and see how the module looks in the morning. First impression? Wonderful! I almost nailed what I was envisioning. It's a nice little slice of a rural railroad mainline. The module looks right at home with a couple of 40-foot boxcars sitting on it, but let's put it to the ultimate test. Let's take it outside. Not bad. The colors definitely look a little different compared to before the application of the scenic cement, but I'm learning to compensate for that. The real magic to a T-Trak module, however, is this. The Floridian module and the Field module joined together. Both of these modules are interchangeable with the thousands of other T-Trak modules out there, and your modules will be too, provided you follow the T-Trak standards. That's the neat thing about T-Trak modules. They're small, manageable, relatively easy to build, and can quickly become part of a much larger layout with a simple snap. The biggest lesson I'm taking away from this project has to do with coloration and scenic cement. I hope this has been interesting, or maybe even a little inspirational for you. Until next time, my friends, stay safe out there, and enjoy the world's greatest hobby.